The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
Cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Taking the temperature on the coronavirus. How are Americans and people across the globe dealing with a crisis affecting every single American and every single nation? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. We're now closing in on a month since the coronavirus crisis took hold, and we will check in on just how well or poorly people are dealing with it, including LibertyNation.com national correspondent Sarah Cowgill on reaction in the heartland, managing editor Mark Angelides on how things are holding up in Europe and around the globe, and legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza jumps on board to discuss the growing threats to liberty in this time of crisis.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We kick things off with the return of our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out an assembly line of wacky, astonishing, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. And this week, it's all about the president and the man who would be president, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. How Trump is handling the crisis, how the likely Democratic presidential nominee is reacting, and what he says he'd do differently. We see in the president someone who struggled to find his footing early on in this crisis, started to gain his footing over the last week or 10 days, and now is all but returning to his familiar style of presentation, shall we say. Appearing day after day before a national audience, Trump has been boxed into the type of formal presentations which have not traditionally been in his wheelhouse. But when he joined a virtual town hall on Fox News, he let his guard down a bit and discussed what is now coming to the fore as the biggest issue in all this: how Americans are getting restless, to say the least, about the economy.
Our country is not supposed to be, it's not built to shut down. Our people are full of vim and vigor and energy. They don't want to be locked into a house or an apartment or some space. It's not for our country. We're not built that way. And I said, I don't want the cure to be worse than the problem itself, the problem being obviously the problem. And, you can destroy a country this way by closing it down, where it literally goes from being the most prosperous. I mean, we had the best economy in the history of our country 3 weeks ago. And then all of a sudden we're supposed to shut it down. And then we're supposed to pay people not to go to work. We never had that. We used to pay people to go to work.
So you can hear the pressure building on Trump from himself and others to loosen the grip of this national social distancing and shutdown of so many places and things. The president accentuated his apparent leaning towards loosening restrictions in the coming days by adding that up to now, the coronavirus has actually been less devastating than the flus which strike the nation every winter.
We lose thousands and thousands of people a year to the flu. We don't turn the country off. We average 37,000 people a year. Can you believe that? And actually, this year we're having a bad flu season. We lose much more than that to automobile accidents. We didn't call up the automobile company to say, stop making cars.
And President Trump is now apparently comfortable enough in handling this crisis that he's starting to return to his old ways, rightfully crediting himself for what may well be seen in retrospect as the single most important decision he made while ridiculing his opponent.
I made a decision to close off to China. That was weeks early. And honestly, I took a lot of heat. Sleepy Joe Biden said it's xenophobic. I don't know if he knows what that means, but that's okay. He said it's racist, what I did. Thousands and thousands of more people, probably tens of thousands, would be dead right now if I didn't make that decision. And I must say, doctors, nobody wanted to make that decision at the time. It was very, very early. Call it luck or call it talent, it doesn't matter. We made a great decision.
Indeed, the ban on travel from China will likely be seen in the rearview mirror as vital to stopping a massive spread of COVID-19. On the other hand, he might have shut down travel from Europe earlier. But at this point, the hindsight of everyone outside the White House is 2020, and that would, of course, include the man hoping to unseat the president this November, Joe Biden. He's isolated himself at his home, but has done a number of media interviews, all with the same theme, that Trump, who the left attacked as being absent as the crisis hit, is now talking too much and failing.
He should stop talking and start to listen to the medical experts. You talk about having an economic crisis. You want an economic crisis, watch this spike. Watch the number of dead go up. Watch the number of people who, in fact, connect with this virus. When are you going to be able to open the economy? Look, we all want the economy to open as rapidly as possible. The way to do that is let's take care of the medical side of this immediately. One of the things, he's not responsible for the coronavirus, but he's responsible for the delay in taking the actions that need to be taken as far back as January. And I find it incredible. Look, this is ridiculous. He says he's a wartime president. Well, God, act like one.
So the president should just shut up. Let the nation wonder what he's doing. He coulda, woulda, shoulda, and Joe Biden, yes, Joe Biden could handle things much better. But I'm personally relieved to hear the former vice president put my mind at ease by admitting Donald Trump did not cause the virus. Who knew? And we'll be back with The View from the Heartland as Liberty Nation Radio rolls on.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Where can you find honest political commentary with sobering analysis, accountability, deconstructing threats to our liberty, and boldly reporting the truth? Subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, the left and right coasts have been struggling mightily to contain the coronavirus, particularly California and Washington on the West Coast. And the biggest victim of the virus, New York City and state on the East Coast. But in the broad swath in between sits the heartland, which is at once thought to be the backbone of the country and the sweep of country which was the linchpin for Trump's shocking election. They haven't been hit nearly as hard, and the perspectives, if not the regulations, are quite different from the ones you're getting from the elites who dominate, well, the elite media. No better person to offer us the heartland perspective from what we joke about, but what the left thinks is actually flyover country, than our gal on the ground in the heartland, LibertyNation.com national correspondent Sarah Cowgill. Welcome back to the show, young lady.
It is a pleasure to be here, Tim.
More of a pleasure to have you. So here we are 2 or 3 weeks into crisis mode, Sarah. How seriously would you say the folks around you are generally taking the warnings and regulations coming out of Washington and from their individual governors?
You know, Tim, the folks that live, between the Rockies and the Appalachians are rule followers. They will stick to the rules. They like order. They like a conservative lifestyle. If the president or their governor or their local sheriff tells them to stay home, stay put, and don't touch anybody, that's what they're going to do. But on the other hand of that, mentally and emotionally, they are not concerned. They know they don't meet as many people out here in the sticks. We don't come in contact with a lot of people. In New York, heck, you could have 1,000 people in your apartment building using the same elevator and breathing on each other's mailboxes. We don't have that here. On any given day, anybody who goes to work in a factory may see 20 or 30 people, stop at the Dollar General, see another 5 or 6 people, and go home. We just don't have that contamination of too many people.
You know, you were mentioning Dollar General, a place where many people shop, myself included, over the years. And, you know, going into regular supermarkets now, it reminds me of going into the dollar stores where, you know, they get stuff in, they put it on the shelf, people come in, take it out, and maybe that shelf's empty for a week or two. And that's what the regular supermarkets are like. But Sarah, the present argument on the coronavirus is the health of people versus the health of the economy. People must survive, but those people also depend on the economy for an acceptable quality of life. What's the chatter you're hearing on this matter of health versus economy? How risk averse do you sense the regular folk are?
I think that if this becomes a concluded event for the most part at the end of the month, or like in Indiana, it's until April 7th. That's the cutoff date where they're going to make evaluations and see what the spread is, et cetera. I think if people are ready for April 7th, they're counting down, and if that happens and it's okay, I think they will be throwing money at the economy. If it continues to go on, people are going to hole up. They're going to rat hole their money because we live in an area where the cost of living is very low, but also the wages are lower out here. And they just will not be able to weather it. The small businesses won't be able to weather much longer being on lockdown.
I want to put this next question delicately, but the people who are suffering the most from this are the people on the coast in cities and states that are, I would say, further left than probably any states in the country, whereas the heartland famously put Trump in office. What's the feeling about people distant from the heartland who are suffering in this, who are on the coast in very different lives with very different beliefs?
It's a matter of conviction. And the people in the heartland are very conservative, and they will do what they think they have to do in order to keep going, to weather the storm. How we feel about possibly the folks on the East Coast or the West Coast, most Heartlanders blame their liberal governments for the mess they're in. They don't blame COVID-19. They don't blame President Trump. They blame the individual governors and governments that didn't see something coming. How did they not see it coming with so many homeless people carrying random diseases we haven't seen, since the Middle Ages, and they haven't done anything about that? How are they going to contain this? How are they going to contain this contagion?
So you know what we're hearing from the media and from people all over the political spectrum, mostly from the left. Trump acted too soon, or he acted too late. His action was not radical enough, or it was too radical. He's too concerned with the virus and not enough with the economy, or the reverse. Give me a general sense of how your fellow Heartlanders, as you can describe it, view the job that Trump is doing in this unprecedented crisis, which, after all, has transformed his entire presidency.
For the most part, they watched. The Heartlanders watched as it sort of started to slowly become more newsworthy, ramp up from the, we're not going to worry about it. It's not like as virulent as the flu has been. It's just not this kind of bug, to where he is now doing daily briefings and he's on it. I mean, maybe he started a little late. Maybe he wasn't screaming pandemic to scare the nation. But he's on it now, and he delivers a message every day, and people are stepping up. His approval ratings are the highest they've ever been, and that's job ratings, not just, pandemic ratings. So I think most of the people in this country, including the governors of the big states on either coast, are grateful that he is where he's at with this and is taking the right steps and is moving forward instead of backward. The ridiculousness of that stimulus package, the pandering back and forth, that should have been done a lot quicker. And I think, with what the Democrats were asking on the second go around, they should have just said, okay, fine, it's a drop in the bucket. Let's get the economy rolling. Let's make sure that once this is over, we're not going to be, buried.
Now let's close with a purely political question. In all this, in this crisis, Trump can say he saved us from a worse fate, no matter what the fate is. But it'll be easy for Democrats to claim that Trump failed and they could have done better, no matter what the outcome is. Neither side can prove their point, but the Democrats can form a great theoretical argument on the issue. So as of today, late March 2020, do you think this crisis will be just about the only issue in the upcoming election?
If it gets over with sooner than later, I think it will be the recovery of the economy and not how the crisis was handled. If the crisis continues and we just delay getting back to normal, that's going to be their argument. The good news is Joe Biden can't string together 3 words and make a sentence, let alone talk about this in any kind of authority. So they're going to have to circle the wagons and find some people that are going to be their spokespeople to nail Trump with this.
Is there much interest or any interest in what Joe Biden has to say about all this? And have you noticed much, if any, reaction to what he has said? Mostly, of course, harshly critical of the president.
Interestingly enough, he was doing a live virtual town hall, and a reporter mentioned the Gallup poll with Trump's 49% approval rating, and Mr. Biden said, but that's just on the pandemic alone. And she corrected him and said, no, that's overall job rating for this president at this point in time. And, he didn't know, he stumbled. He didn't know what to do about that. And he said, well, then it should be high. We're in the middle of something we don't know anything about. And people on the internet, especially in our little flyover country, they are horribly pissed off at the DNC for allowing this man to be using this man who obviously is having struggles with something going on. Dementia is what most people are assuming, and they are not happy that the poor guy is just being, brought out to be the whipping boy.
On that note, Ms. Cowgill, you stay safe and keep everyone around you safe as you're on lockdown now in the heartland. We'll be back in touch shortly. Thanks for joining us.
It was my pleasure, Tim. See you soon.
Sarah Cowgill, national columnist for LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we're back with a look at how Americans are reacting to President Trump's leadership through this crisis and how the world is coping.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Taking the temperature of America and the world in this time of unprecedented crisis. That's what we're doing today here on Liberty Nation Radio. And there's no better man to give us the readings from the thermometer than the managing editor of LibertyNation.com, Mark Angelides, who studies opinion polls, approval numbers, and betting odds with a microscope each and every day. So welcome, Mark, and let's start with approval numbers for the president. Strangely, it seems his numbers have gone down in Rasmussen, where he's always been particularly strong, but up in Gallup and some of the other polls where he's been weaker traditionally. What do you surmise about Americans' view of Donald Trump's performance in the coronavirus crisis?
Well, Tim, it's quite clear that these polls that we're seeing coming out are a reaction to how this is being handled. Obviously, a lot of it's to do with him being on air all the time as well, so people can actually see he's doing something. Like it's daily broadcasts. But you mentioned the polls, as you say, Rasmussen, traditionally around 49 to 51% for Donald Trump, which is usually the outlier, although Rasmussen is incredibly well respected. But he's hovering around 46% there. But as you point out, you've got the Gallup poll, you've got the latest, is it the Reuters and Ipsos, the Economist YouGov polls? They're all at 49%. The most interesting aspect of that is where that support's coming from. Because obviously we know that the Republican base is very much behind President Trump, almost no matter what. And that's sticking around 92% support within Republicans. But what you're seeing is independents, especially in the Gallup poll, independents, you've got an 8-point bump. And in Democrats, you've got a 6-point bump, which is huge. That's putting it up to 13% job approval rating for the president from Democrats. Now, if even a small handful of that percent switches sides come the election, which could happen, I'm sure we're going to talk about Joe Biden later. But even if just a small percentage, you're going to see some major swings for Donald Trump.
Do you get the sense, Mark, at this point, that COVID-19 is going to be just about the only issue people will wind up voting on in November, or will all the issues which were front and center before the crisis hit come back to play a big role in the outcome?
At this point, right now, I think it is not so much the COVID reaction, the COVID-19 reaction, but it's more what Trump's doing to protect the economy, which will come back. Because it's always about the economy. It always is. But what's happening here is people are looking at how President Trump is handling the economy and what he's doing to kind of bounce it back, especially with his optimism about getting things reopened around Easter, which around 61% of American voters actually think is doable. But what you're going to see is people are looking at how long would this financial disaster continue if it were in the hands of somebody else, for example, Joe Biden.
Okay, so what about Joe Biden? He's done two things essentially during this crisis. He's locked himself away in his home, and he's held some online events which have been awkward, sloppy, rehearsed at best, while calling President Trump's leadership in the crisis a colossal failure. Is it to Biden's advantage to stay hidden and throw the occasional stink bomb at the president, or does he need to be more proactive?
It depends on his goal, Tim. If he wants to become the next president of the United States, he needs to do a lot more. If he wants to limit damage to the actual Democratic Party, then staying hidden away from sight is probably the best thing he can do for them. It's really appearing on a couple of live streams with what many people would describe as a boomer technology, meaning that he hasn't really got the hang of putting together the video and the sound, or the people who's doing it for him are just doing an incredibly poor job of this. And so he's losing the young audience straight away just by poor production qualities. And then, of course, his no malarkey happy hour was really just a sycophantic mass gathering to worship at the feet of Biden by party faithfuls. It's not convincing anyone. It's not inspiring anyone. There's very little that he's doing to pose a threat in 2020.
Of course, you could make the argument that all he has to do is not be Donald Trump, and then you have a referendum on Trump set up. But of course, there's the question of his declining neurological health. But let's talk about the betting odds, because they certainly have changed and fluctuated during this crisis. Are the numbers here in late March even relevant to what's ultimately going to happen in November?
Not really. They do give an indication, certainly, of where the country's going. And obviously, positivity brings more positivity, negativity brings more negativity. So people are watching these numbers, and they are quite in tune with polling. But at the moment, what you've got is Joe Biden is still the favorite to win the nomination. But that has gone from a very strong position a couple of weeks ago to he's still favorite, but not quite so much. Andrew Cuomo is coming in very, very hot behind here. He's entered the betting marks at 20-1. He's not even standing. But I think a lot of people are toying with the idea. How realistic it is, we don't know, but toying with the idea of perhaps handing it over to Cuomo at the Milwaukee convention. But in terms of who's going to win the presidency, based on the betting odds, well, 2 weeks ago, Joe Biden, for the very first time, had a higher chance of winning the presidency than Donald Trump. That's the only time that's happened since Donald Trump was elected. But things have gone back to normal now. And I'm presuming this is because of Donald Trump's good response to the COVID crisis. And obviously, Joe Biden, as you mentioned, being locked away in his basement somewhere. And so the odds are now showing Donald Trump back as firm favorite, Joe Biden, not a very close second.
Okay, so the European Union had arguably the toughest fight in all this, except, of course, China, because of the open borders between their more than 24 countries. So we talk a lot about America's ability to recover from this crisis, Mark, but what about the EU?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Tim. As you know, this is one of my favorite topics, the EU, and what I've predicted for a long time is the impending doom of the actual EU as an institution. I think this corona crisis is really just exacerbating the situation. They've completely failed in terms of leadership. I'll just give you a couple of examples, if I may. Italy, arguably the hardest hit in Europe by this crisis, decided that it would put some of the government money into hotels in Sardinia, which is a part of Italy, to try and just keep them there so they're not going to go under during this crisis and can come back afterwards. Very similar to what this new relief package is doing, is providing money to keep people afloat. But because the European Union has what we call state aid rules, which means that because it's anti-competitive for other EU nations to put government money into private industry, they've charged Italy $8.5 million. And now Italy, obviously, they don't have that money to splash out and pay these fines. So now every single day they're being fined extra for not paying. This is not the solidarity that the EU billed itself as. And of course, as the crisis gets worse, each country is essentially, they're closing their borders. They're refusing to send personal protective equipment, PPE stuff, that have been ordered and paid for in good faith from other European neighbors, because they're saying they want to keep them for themselves. This is Germany in particular, not sending the order that Italy made of all these N95 masks. And of course, you've got France blocking a truck of N95 masks that was on its way to Britain, to the hospitals in Britain, where they're very much needed. And the Border Patrol stopped it, and they've impounded all these N95 masks. Essentially, there's no other way to look at this but say they stole them from Britain. It's just shocking. The whole thing's falling apart. It was an edifice that was built on sand, and it's just crumbling now.
Well, and the problem is that, of course, in this global economy, when our trading partners like the EU are suffering, that means the downdraft is substantial for the United States and the rest of the world. Mark, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Mark Angelides, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, joining us from the UK. Stay there. We'll be back with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we welcome you to the portion of Liberty Nation Radio, which we entitled Talkin' Liberty. It's when we welcome in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor. You all know who he is. We call him our guardian of individual liberty, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim.
Well, treacherous times for liberty, Scott, and the Department of Justice is apparently in some quarters seen as exploiting this crisis with a power grab. You put it, bye-bye habeas corpus, which literally means produce the body.
The writ of a habeas corpus, what it is you apply for a judge to sign the writ. That's the legal mechanism. When the judge actually signs that writ of habeas corpus, he's ordering a jailer, typically, but some other executive-level authority, to bring your body to him, to his courtroom or her courtroom, and present them so that they can adjudge whether or not they are being held legally. It's one of our most precious of rights, and it is a direct right that we have under our with the federal courts, Tim, that doesn't have to do with any bit of federal law or federal regulation. It's in the Constitution that the courts have the power, and we have the ability to ask them to exercise that power. So the Justice Department, Tim, this story is a Politico exclusive by Betsy Woodruff Swan, who details the list of proposals in a COVID-19 sort of package that the Justice Department was asking for, downgrading, Tim, our right to habeas corpus by allowing increased, basically, distance procedures where people don't actually have to be brought to a courtroom, and also ways to avoid the process entirely by having courtrooms closed. Now, Tim, it's important to remember that the courts are in charge of managing the courts, and they don't need the Justice Department's help in their management. So the idea that this is just helpful information for the courts, they handle their own matters, including their own COVID-19 safety measures and so on. So this is a power grab, and it's feeling like more like a speech now, Tim. But I have to say that anytime there is a crisis, they will come for the liberty, and that's what seems like it's happening here.
This feels like another iteration of a 10th Amendment issue, the powers of the federal government versus the state. I think what you're saying then is that perhaps this is the right action to provide, distance testimony, for example, but that it's something that should be decided by local and state authorities, not by some decree from Washington.
Anytime we have a situation where the courts have less power to rule over people and the executive has more power over them in an arrestee situation, that is not a boon for liberty, Tim.
Well, here's something completely unsurprising. The Second Amendment is under attack during this coronavirus emergency. What are the tactics being used to try and limit the Second Amendment rights of Americans?
What we've seen, Tim, is that in anti-gun jurisdictions or jurisdictions where the person who makes the rules are anti-gun, they are including gun stores in lists of stores that must be closed and are not permitted to legally be open during the state of emergency that is declared. We saw this in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey both. Both of those states had their cases go to court. We're still waiting to hear about the New Jersey ruling. The Pennsylvania case, the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania ruled that it was okay for gun stores to remain closed. But then, Tim, the governor quickly changed course and without much fanfare added the gun shops to a list of places that were approved for opening during the emergency. And to boot, a little icing on the cake, Tim, is a lot of these police departments are saying that they're releasing dangerous criminals to alleviate stress on the justice system, and also they're going to cease arresting or prosecuting lower-level criminal offenses. So we've got more criminals on the street, less protection for people, and at the same time they're being denied the constitutional right to protect themselves.
Well, at least now, about 3 weeks into this crisis, Scott, there are other things we're talking about, albeit ones that seem like a replay of arguments and debates that never get settled that we've been having for decades. And one of them, of course, is over abortions, where the two sides are so far apart it's hard to create any common ground. And now Planned Parenthood, in the midst of all this, has sued Texas over that state's halt on abortions.
Well, this is akin to like the firearms issue, Tim. The Supreme Court has said that the right to obtain an abortion is a fundamental right. just like they've said that the right to keep and bear arms is a fundamental right. Now, the court has treated those two rights differently in their practice, whereby they have allowed all manner of restrictions against the exercise of the Second Amendment right, but against the abortion right, they have been very quick to carve sort of a wide path so that people can exercise that right. And the anti-abortion people in Texas and around the country have done just what the anti-gun people have done. They've seized on this as an opportunity to disallow abortions by saying that they are not essential, and they're included in a list of elective surgeries that are banned until the crisis is over. They have effectively been able to ban then abortions, and the suit challenges that. And I expect that I expect the federal courts will strike down that ban because of the nature of abortion jurisprudence in this country, and that it is a fundamental right.
Meanwhile, President Trump he's done a lot of things in this crisis. Of course, he's in front of the country every day for an hour or more. Among the things he's done is sign an executive order targeting three sort of catchphrases and words that are big right now, Scott: hoarding, price gouging, and supply chain.
Yes, Tim, this is, I think, a real detriment to our economy and our recovery when people who have goods that they can bring to market that people desperately want will now have to worry about whether or not they might be prosecuted for doing so. So if you had a warehouse full of these masks, for instance, and, I'm not talking about people who bought them a week and a half ago. Maybe you had it from 2 years ago. Are you called a hoarder now because you didn't bring them to market sooner? If I was advising a client, I would have to say I don't know. I might just do nothing rather than go to federal prison. So these sorts of things we know economically don't work. The best thing that they can do is have a totally free market. That would increase the supply the most. So it's an imposition on liberty, and one that double dips him as a suppressor of actually getting these goods into the supply chain. So bad news all around there.
And you will continue to stand on the soapbox and be the last man standing defending price gouging. You make a good point about it, though.
Thank you, Tim. It is I will be out there all by myself.
Scott Cosenza, the last man standing. Okay. Now, I love the way you present this last story to me in a summary of what you were going to talk about. Everyone else is saying a $2 trillion relief package is passed by the Senate and goes on to the House, will be signed by the president. But you term it a $2 trillion tax increase.
Tim, I think it's incumbent upon us to realize this is a bill that these senators and congresspersons and the president just wrote that we're going to have to pay. There's this idea that, we're all going to be saved now, I think, because of this. But really, this is just a shifting of the future payments of some Americans to present-day payments to others. And I suspect that in that $2 trillion, there may be some dollars well spent, but that many, or if not most of them, will be to interest groups that are well placed to take advantage of an emergency need for a $2 trillion package.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, hosted by Scott and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue with our own Mark Angelides, all available on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donners saying stay safe and stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.